Welcome. I'm your host, Henri Arslanian, and welcome to the Future of Money podcast. My goal with this podcast is very simple. It's to go deep in some of the biggest ideas, trends, and developments we are seeing in the field of crypto, and hopefully empower you with this information and then let you make your own decision on what their impact can be on the future of money and finance. To do this, I invite each week one of the leading figures of the global crypto community to have a one-on-one conversation amongst crypto aficionados and discuss some of these ideas. My guest today is my good friend Brett King, best-selling author and futurist. One thing you may not know about Brett is that he's a certified pilot and an SR-22 Cirrus aircraft owner who flies often around New York. So again, you see that you can be a futurist, but at the same time, a pilot as well. Brett, great to have you with us on the Future of Money podcast.
Well, you got to have futurists on the Future of Money, right? So I'm glad to be with you, Henri. And as we were catching up just before, it's been far too long.
Exactly. I have to say, Brett, I think you've done so well the last couple of years with your books, with your speaking, with all different content. I think you contributed a lot to the, frankly, not only the development of crypto, but also fintech. You were really one of the pioneers when it comes to that space. And actually, before we start and we dive about your latest book and talking about Techno-Socialism, can you maybe tell us about your story and share with the audience? So before we dived into some of these exciting topics we're going to talk about today.
Well, I grew up in Australia. I'm an Aussie kid, but I've spent now 22 years offshore. And so I spent time in Hong Kong. We actually, we sort of passed each other like ships in the night in Hong Kong to some extent. Then I went to Dubai for 5 years and then New York. So real global citizen. During that time, went from being sort of a coder in the space to now getting, into sort of technology advisory, and then in the banking space, working on technology in that space. That inevitably led into fintech and crypto and those sort of things. So in 2010, my first book came out, Bank 2.0, and that was a bestseller. And that then took me down the path of writing in the space and advising in the space. 2014, I got to go to the White House and advise the National Economic Council on fintech and its development there. Have done the same with central banks around the world. And obviously the last few years, a lot of that discussion has been around crypto and CBDCs and tokenization of the world and things like that.
No, it's going to be awesome. I think you played a big role, and I think I've read probably most of your books over the years, Brett. So I think you contributed a lot to the debate and the discourse around this topic.
I've tried,
Exactly.
I founded the very first challenger bank in the world, mobile challenger bank, Moven. Of course, now we're banking as a service, but I've tried to be tactical as well and sort of get my walk the talk, as they say, right?
Exactly. So, Brett, obviously, one of the goals of this podcast is obviously we talk about crypto and we focus sometimes and we deep dive, but also the goal is to share some of the big ideas we're seeing on the future of money. And today, obviously, you're launching soon your new book called Techno-Socialism. And maybe it could be good if you can share with our audience, what do you mean by Techno-Socialism and what do you think the impact could be?
Right. So, it's not a political definition. It's more of a social one. The reality of this is that technology allows us to deliver all of the collective benefits that you would typically associate with socialism, but with a fraction of the cost of the existing system. And so really it's more techno-collectivism or techno-humanism in some respect. But it looks at the way the economy can serve the core needs of the citizens first and foremost before, we look at the market, driven forces and so forth. Well, that was really sort of the alignment we had, is that the real issue today is that the economy works for a very small percentage of the people, and fixing that longer term to get rid of inequality and also absorb changes like the introduction of artificial intelligence and climate change is going to require very different economic thinking. And so that's really at the heart of the theory.
And actually, let's dive in. I want to, discuss some of the big trends that you talk in your book and what the impact could be on the future of finance and the future of money. Like one of them, for example, in your book, you talk a lot about the impact of artificial intelligence, saying that right now, over the next couple of years, up to 50% of jobs in the U.S. may be at threat, due to artificial intelligence. But at the same time, we can probably reduce the government spending we can cut it by half, again, leveraging artificial intelligence. Can you elaborate more about this and really share with us some of the practical impact you think this could have, not only on society, but also the world of finance as well?
Well, finance is one of those industries that's going to be very heavily impacted by AI because there's so much that can be automated, frankly. The basic risk infrastructure that we have, most of that can be, automated. Especially as we get into highly automated societies, you're going to have a lot of automation in terms of payments built into that. The FSI is as a sector is certainly at risk. But the real issue here is, where does automation impact us? And so the first thing is it's going to impact sort of process work, where humans are acting like robots, so factory work and things like this. We're already seeing this with, for example, Tesla gigafactories and so forth. Just maximum effort to try and automate, those components of society. So as that happens, those jobs that are human process related, they get automated. Then it's information and data related, they get automated. And as that happens, you go through the strata of jobs, in terms of looking for automation targets. So that's the purpose of automation, is AI, is to eliminate humans from the workforce largely. Now, that does give us the ability to do other work, it goes beyond things that can be automated. But there's two sets of criteria for that. One is, what can we do as humans that differentiate from robots? And the other piece really is the technology piece, where this places high demand on the economy for new technology skills. And the reality is that's where we have the challenge in, societies like the United States, because we're just not training our children for the right jobs that are going to be generated in the 21st century. At the same time, huge potential for automating government, as you say. In the book, we put forward a business case that we could reduce the cost of healthcare in the United States, the total systemic cost, by 70%, 70. And so that would make the proposition of universal healthcare in the United States a no-brainer. Because if you can reduce it to 30% of the existing system costs, then and afford to give everyone healthcare for free, then why would you really argue about that? As a cost, right?
But when you talk about that, we can reduce the cost of healthcare by 70%, leveraging AI. Can you share with us maybe some of the big pillars of that idea? Why do you believe that's the case, and why do you believe that's something that can be done?
I'm glad you asked. So we looked at a number of areas where the healthcare system is inefficient. So, for example, 40% of diagnostics in the United States, 40% of diagnosis is incorrect, right? So there's a high error rate in diagnostics. So artificial intelligence is also already showing huge promise in fields like oncology, cancer detection, and so forth, where it's better at detecting these problems than humans. So if you play that out over the next 20 years, AI-based diagnostics remove that 40% error rate, or most of it. Then you've got 40% of healthcare costs in the States today are administrative costs. Right, middlemen passing stuff back and forth, billing, all of those things. Again, robotic process automation, you can wipe out 40% of those costs pretty quickly, or most of those. Then we get into the tech that improves the healthcare outcomes so that it's more cost effective, such as gene therapy, where we take diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, cystic fibrosis, cardiac conditions, certain cancers, where you have a genetic disposition to that, and we can tweak your genes, like edit out, bugs out of your DNA to improve your chances there. And then we can use real-time capabilities like gut biome, fluidics, microfluidics, blood work, and all of these sort of things to go into a maintenance phase of your healthcare, where we can assess the higher risks of disease potential and deal with those and mitigate those as a preventative health maintenance piece. And we can use things like personalized medicine and things like that. So you stack all of those things together and you get this accumulative benefit in terms of cost reduction across the system. But it requires different systemic thinking. That's the risk. All of those potential tools are there, but you have to change the system. So the existing system, the way the FDA works, the way patents work and drugs are produced, that system in its entirety is going to have to change.
This episode is brought to you by Crypto.com, where you can buy Bitcoin and over 150 other cryptocurrencies with over 20 different fiat currencies. Get up to 8% cash back instantly using the Crypto.com Visa card, plus 100% rebates for your Netflix, Spotify, and Amazon Prime subscriptions. Check out the link in the podcast description to download the Crypto.com app and stake CRO to get $25 with the code Henri2021. And this is very interesting because I think one of the things you mentioned in your book is how such a high percentage of bankruptcies actually are due to healthcare costs that people are not able to pay, right? And you touch upon the whole topic of inequality. And this is, I think, one topic that is obviously we talk a lot in the crypto community as well, is obviously income inequality is a big challenge. You mentioned, I think, in your book that the US has the highest inequality rate in the G20, I think ranks 125th globally. And I think you mentioned how the 1% of Americans own more assets than 90% of the bottom. What is the role you think that, as we think about the future of finance, how can we tackle some of these issues around inequality by leveraging technology and the role that it can have in not only in finance, but also in society at large?
Well, the great promise of crypto, even with Bitcoin, in the first white paper, was the decentralized nature of crypto, right? And so the ability to give more power to more people to generate income or returns outside of the existing system. So there's obviously that component to it. But I think more of what we focus on in the book is that crypto is an outcome of automation and technologies like the internet in society, that as society becomes more automated, we have to find ways to digitize our monetary system to fit with the way commerce and so forth works. And so crypto more broadly and CBDCs we see as an artifact of that technological change. So, on the asset side, you have NFTs and you have this new asset class as crypto. You have efforts to create stable coins for transacting capabilities, but you have $3 trillion of total market cap of crypto, that is represented an entirely new asset infrastructure that to some extent stays outside of the classical system, although they're always trying to bring it in with regulation. And so these are elements of the fact that the fiat way we used to think about money and the way we used to control flows of money in the old system are breaking down because of digitization and real-time elements. Even just the real-time component, if you think about it, even in the US today, you still can't send money real time from bank to bank, which is pretty shocking. I mean, Hong Kong and Singapore and other countries have had this capability for many years. The Fed is talking about it in 2024. Fed now, we joke it should be called Fed later. But, that is a functional element of the system that is being outpaced by the developments in crypto and so forth. And so you see the pressures coming on the old system versus this new, trying to find ways to classify digital assets, or change the way wealth flows and so forth. But inequality functionally, that's really a problem in respect to the way the economy values yours and my time differently. And, that our total value in the economy from a pure economics perspective is our ability to produce economic output. And that's where things will have to radically change philosophically, because work itself will have to take on a different role in the future because of high levels of automation. And I know some people get upset about this, like it's attack on capitalism, that people, like, for example, UBI, if you think about universal basic income, some people are very opposed to that because they think it's a social welfare benefit to people. But if you've got people that can't work, if you've eliminated their type of work from the system, then what do? You let them die, or do you give them some sort of social structure? And when we do provide UBI, we looked at 72 studies around the world on this. People that receive UBI, they produce new businesses, start new businesses at a much higher rate than the basic sample size of citizens. They get more involved in local needs and community support and things like that. So it's about a sort of structural change where work and us as humans face from an economic factor in the society as well.
So it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned so many interesting topics. I want to go into it. One of them you mentioned is UBI, Universal Basic Income. I think one of the arguments you often discuss in the book is that actually CBDCs can be one of the solutions around UBI. Can you elaborate more about that? What do you mean? And what is the relationship between Universal Basic Income and central bank digital currencies?
So we propose different ways of paying for UBI. One of those is from the wealth that's created from artificial intelligence. Another is, various people have proposed this, a wealth tax on robots and algorithms that take human jobs. So if you're going to replace a human with an algorithm, that there's a tax component to that. We also look at big picture stuff like cancelling national debt. And that national debt being put into programs for climate mitigation, for example. And so people that want access to UBI have to do a couple of years of national service in respect to climate mitigation that's paid for by national debt, as a mitigation response. But one of the other suggestions is we can effectively create an alternative money supply for basic goods and, use cryptocurrencies for that to fill that need. But my feeling is that I think as we automate more and more of government and our societies, the cost of UBI will become less of an issue, and it will be more of a revolution risk management, we call it in the book, right? Which is the amount of social distress and tearing the social cohesion apart because of massive levels of unemployment and poverty and things like that will come with not being able to work in the way we do, that UBI becomes the only reasonable response. And so that's why you hear people like Elon Musk and Richard Branson, Zuckerberg and Bezos say it's largely inevitable, because they play it out as corporations, that their corporations are planning on much greater levels of automation. And they know that, human labor is becoming uncorrelated with, production and output. And, UBI is one of the only tools we have. But it doesn't mean people won't work. It means people will be able to do what they want to do rather than having to do a job that puts food on the table. That's sort of really the core change, right?
But where do you think, Brett, if in the event we move forward with UBI, where do you think we could see this being experimented, right? For example, even the last presidential elections, many even business leaders like politicians like Henri were proposing the idea, and obviously didn't get as much like of a let's say welcoming response in many circles, like as you mentioned. But if you think if you look at the world today, where do you think are good countries or regions that we may be able to experiment with UBI and the kind of financial ecosystem that could go with it?
Yeah, well, so as I said, we looked at about 70 UBI trials around the world. Some of the more successful ones are at larger scale, such as in the Nordic regions and so forth. California's done a few trials on this and had, a pretty good success with that. But I think, right now is a very difficult time to have the conversation on UBI. But there's two sides to this. One is, the pandemic has really showed us that stimulus payments are an effective way of keeping the economy going. And so it's sort of a trial run in many respects for, future UBI in terms of, an impetus or a cause for that. But, what we're talking about here is really in the timeframe 2035 to 2045. So, talking about UBI now is going to be tough, but we need to plan for it for the next decade as automation kicks in. So as we get closer to those dates, and as we see more and more of society being automated, then UBI will become more of a discussion point, and we'll either start to look for solutions or we'll reject that as an outcome. And so that's one of these four. We propose four different timelines or four potential futures, and one of those is where societies that are very geared towards thinking about this type of the way they think about this problem is, for example, we could see in the United States rejection of artificial intelligence because it puts humans out of work, as an example. Now, it's not likely because I think the capitalist corporate forces will work against that. But there could be economies which say, well, look, if we have to pay humans this UBI because they can't work, let's prioritize humans in the workforce over AI. And that could be one of those potential inflection points in human history where we have to make a response. So it's not guaranteed that we'll have UBI, but it's the most effective or optimal response to the changes that we think will come economically. But it is one of those decision points, such as our response globally to climate and things like that, where humanity really has a choice.
Very, very interesting. Brett, I want you to move the conversation on, really zero down on some of the topics around crypto and the CBDCs. For example, in your book, you talk a lot about the rise of CBDCs and crypto, but also in the geopolitical context with China and the US and the interaction going on there. What is the reason, in your opinion, that we are seeing the kind of the actions on crypto on behalf of China? For example, the ban on Bitcoin mining, the focus on e-CNY. What do you think that could happen, and what do you think the impact will be on U.S.-China relationships?
You know as much as I do, China is a super competitive market, and so they are looking for ways to secure their economic dominance. For no other reason that's how they see themselves as a nation. China, in the past was the dominant world economic power, a technological prowess, hundreds of years ago. And so they just see that as their sort of natural future state. And so anything that's going to compete with that, they sort of want to push out of the way, and just they're hyper focused. So when you look at e-CNY, they see that as their response to crypto. And they see any crypto in that market that could compete with people taking up e-CNY as negative. So I think that's part of it. I also think, in no small part, they're going through an economic transition in terms of energy usage, and they're moving off coal. Even more pressure than ever before right now for nation states to do that. Germany just announced they're going to be completely off coal by 2030. That's putting a lot of pressure on India, China, the US, and so forth, who are trying to stretch that goal out. There's absolutely no reason for us to stay on coal in modern economies today. The price of solar and wind is 1/10 of the price of coal for electricity generation. So, we should be making these shifts. But China is in this balance point where at the moment they're deploying solar as fast as they can. They've deployed 260 gigawatts of solar in the last 5 years. The US has done 60 gigawatts over the last 40 years. So to put that in perspective, right? But Bitcoin mining, because 60% of Bitcoin mining was coming out of China, it was creating huge energy demands. And so their energy system during this transition can't cope with that either. But what we say in the book is, in terms of China's big picture ambition stuff, e-CNY, when you lay that over things like the Beijing Olympics, the first use of a CBDC in a large scale trial like this, when we look at the cross-border stuff they're doing in Hong Kong and Singapore with CBDC, it tends us towards the fact that we think that this is going to be linked to the Belt and Road in the future, that e-CNY, commodity trading and things like this will become the framework with which they try to attack the petrodollar from a trading dominance perspective. So this is, for them, CBDC is a geopolitical play in many ways, as much as it is an economic one.
It's interesting, Brett. If you look at the latest data from the time we're recording this right now, there's about 140 million people in China who have opened an account. There's about, even in the pilot so far, there's been around $9.7 billion of value transacted, right? And yes, initially, I think the PBOC was very clear. Initially, it's just for China, but technologically, nothing stops from this being used outside the borders. And I mean, one road is like 65 plus countries, and many of them would love not to use the US dollar for various reasons, right? So I think there's definitely a welcoming market there.
Right. Yeah. So, and it gives them programmability of this as well. You can build smart contracts on top of this. You can do things that the US dollar just doesn't allow you to do today. So, there are tactical advantages for a 21st century economy using a CBDC. This is again what we're talking about here, is that as we move into the 21st century, the ways we used to think about trade, the way we used to think about money flows, in highly automated trading and supply chain situations, it's better to have programmable money, and that's where the US dollar and sort of the fiat view really, is a limitation on that system. So definitely it's part of the maturation of 21st century economies for this type of smart money to emerge.
I think the potential of the programmability of money is very, very interesting. But I want to ask you, Brett, as a futurist, when you look at some of the big trends going on right now, Web 3.0, the Metaverse, how do you think that fits in with the broader topic that you're looking on Techno-Socialism? And where do you think, what would be the real impact that we'll see, not only with Web 3.0, but also the Metaverse and the entire ecosystems that are being built there?
So, we look at policy issues that need to be resolved in the book. And so in the policy issues are things around inequality and how we adapt to climate and all of those sort of things. And one of the areas is the digital sphere, and the metaverse, even NFTs is sort of a way that we're trying to take the physical world and make it virtual. Or create an analogy of our physical world in the virtual space. But the metaverse doesn't only allow us to do that, of course. It allows us to tweak physics in the metaverse. It allows us to do things that, we have limitations on Earth in terms of space or, as I said, certain laws of physics and things. And so the metaverse is this incredible playground that we'll be able to build, but it's also going to be an economic platform in its own right. People will live and work in the metaverse, and they'll generate, crypto tokens or whatever it is might be in the metaverse that they can then trade in for real world, goods. So part of the shift of the economy in terms of jobs and those sort of things is moving into new ways to create jobs in the metaverse, or that create a different value in the digital world. That's definitely, I think, part of it on a longer term basis. But the metaverse is part content, it's part entertainment and gaming. We're going to see elements of the metaverse that overlays in our physical world with mixed reality applications, such as augmented reality glasses that we're going to see, where, you could put games in the physical world overlaid, upon this metaverse infrastructure, for example, and see this projected in your field of view. So it's almost as if we're trying to take this technology and create these various types of simulations and various types of environments for us to play with, but at the same time find the way those virtual worlds should interact with the physical world, whether that's from a commerce perspective or, in other ways. It's certainly going to take us down entirely new paths of design and customer experience and things like that. How are brands going to operate in the metaverse, versus how they're going to operate in the real world? Even in the real world, there's going to be pressure for brands to change the way they operate, like carbon neutrality and using sustainable goods and things like that. So part of the way they'll expand their scope will be in the virtual world as well.
Want your friends and family to learn about crypto? Looking for a useful and insightful Christmas gift? Why not offer them my first online Udemy course called Introduction to Bitcoin and Crypto Assets? I deliver in 90 minutes all the essentials on Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, CBDCs, NFTs, DeFi, security tokens, the metaverse that someone needs to know. Successful completion of the course gives you a certificate which you can post on your LinkedIn profile or CV. Check out the link in the podcast description and use the code Henri25 to get 25% discount. It's interesting, it reminds me of the debates we used to have 15, 20 years ago on companies moving online. And for them, it was often different kind of running a business. Now it's all one. And we're probably going to see the same thing when it comes to the metaverse in a couple of years. And maybe one last question before we move on to the buzz run. I can't believe we're already out of time. Brett, is really when it comes to the DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, right? Of course, in your book, you talk about how the future is going to look like, a lot of how governance may need to be changed. What do you think will have what will be the role of decentralized autonomous organizations and communities that self-govern within this broader ecosystem that you envision may happen, in the next 10 years or so?
Well, ultimately, the most efficient form of government will be a DAO, right? If we can get government to that point, then it's, because laws and regulations become code in the AI world, as does supply chain and resource management. And so effectively, if we could make government a DAO, that's its optimal form in terms of cost to the overall economy. But within that, of course, you're going to have a lot of autonomous organizations. The one we used to illustrate, I think, fairly frequently in the book is how, supply chain will work with drones speaking to, electronic vehicles and ports and things like this, in terms of the automation of the mechanics of supply chain. And the fact that, you may need to come up with these sort of currencies that work internally for robots speaking to each other in this autonomous ecosystem, as an example. But obviously, the intent is to automate as much of government as possible to reduce the cost of government. That's really a realignment of the economy. If you look at the United States, it's the most successful economy the world has seen to date, although China is going to surpass it by 2030. But in the 1950s and 1960s, sort of when US was at its prime, it was the greatest economy the world has ever seen in terms of economic output, 40% of the world's economic output. All of those measures that we use as economists to describe that, GDP growth, full employment, trade balances, all of those things, the US was the best economy in the world. But if you look at the economy's ability to serve the basic needs of citizens, to make sure that every citizen is happy and healthy, able to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Is the economy able to do that? And today, the answer in the US is no. And so economically, the US is a failure in respect to looking after the basic needs of its citizens. And so this is the realignment that sort of the core economic intent should be in the future, because as more issues like AI and disruption of unemployment and as climate change and these things start to impact society, if your focus is just on economic output and GDP, then you're going to not be able to resolve issues like inequality without other incentives or levers into the economy, and that's really the key point.
Brett, this is excellent. Brett, so we're going to finish it off with the bell is with me, the famous bell. We're going to have it I'm going to ask you quick questions, Brett, and I need 2-3 word answers, and the bell will be here to keep us disciplined. Hope you're ready?
Yeah. Let's
rock and roll. So, Brett, as a futurist, who's the futurist you admire the most?
My wife, Miss Metaverse.
Very, very, very good answer there. What is the prediction you think futurists get the most commonly wrong?
The speed of technology adoption.
So you think they got the
on both sides? Sometimes it's too slow. Sometimes it's faster than we expect.
Brett, your first book you ever written was a sci-fi book. Who is your favorite sci-fi writer, and what's your favorite sci-fi book?
Oh, I grew up on Arthur C. Clarke. I have to say him, but today Kim Stanley Robinson. And his book, his series on, climate change and Mars, the Mars trilogy. Yeah, Kim Stanley Robinson, Mars trilogy.
Here we go. Brett, as we mentioned at the beginning, you're a pilot. What is your favorite airline to fly right now when you're flying commercial?
Qatar, because of their business class suite.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible plane out on that side. Another pilot question. What's your favorite airline or plane movie?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know. Yeah, no, ask me another, man. I can't come back.
We'll come back to it. So, Brett, I think obviously you've been a keynote speaker all around the world. Actually, we've had I think last time I saw you, we were together in Bahrain, I think, giving a speech. Obviously, you've given many speeches around the world, many keynotes. What is the one keynote that is the most unforgettable?
I had to open for Woz in Beirut, for Steve Wozniak in Beirut. And I don't get nervous generally, but there was 10,000 people and Woz was immediately after me. So I knew I was going to be compared to him. That and my first TEDx talk. Yeah.
Actually, I remember your first TEDx talk. That's a good one. Yeah, I can imagine opening for Woz is never easy. And Brett, you have obviously one of the most successful podcasts actually on fintech in the world. What is the biggest mistake you think people do when they're launching a podcast or hosting one?
I think just you got to have compelling content. So yeah, don't talk too much yourself. Have a good conversation with people.
Excellent. Brett, two more questions. One of them is, you've obviously written many best-selling books. What is the one advice you give to anyone who wants to write a book?
Give it a shot. Just try. And over time, your writing will get better and people will want to read it more.
And Brett King, the last question on the Future of Money podcast this week. Brett, if you could have lunch with one person, dead or alive, lunch with one person, dead or alive, who would you have lunch with?
Elon Musk. I love the way
I could have bet that would be the answer.
Doge to the moon.
Guys, thank you very much, everybody, for listening today. Make sure to click subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. That would really help us a lot if you like this podcast. It really helps us with discoverability. If you want to stay on top of the latest developments on crypto and the future of money, make sure to follow me on LinkedIn and on Twitter, especially for my weekly crypto capsule show where I summarize the global crypto developments that we need to know in less than 60 seconds. And also don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter on LinkedIn and review my newsletter called The Future of Money, where I share the 3 big ideas on the future of money that we need to know each week. And of course, many of you want to learn more about crypto, the future of money, the future of finance. Make sure to check out my YouTube channel where I have not only videos of previous interviews, and the one with Brett today will be on as well, but also a lot of educational videos as well. And the good news now is all my YouTube channels are, all my content is available not only in English, but also in French, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, that's it. English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese on my various languages. So thank you very much for being with us today. Brett, great to see you again. Thank you for coming on the show.
Mafi mushkila, Bibi. No problem.
And thank you very much, everybody, for listening to us on the Future of Money podcast, and see you all next time.